As most of you already know, Samsung isn't just famous for phones, TV, and displays that practically blind you with brightness. The tech giant from South Korea also made laptops. Yes, real laptop. In the early years, they actually did pretty well, until 2014, when things got rough and Samsung completely pulled its laptops from the European market. Fast forward to today, and they've made a flashy comeback with the Galaxy Book lineup. Beautiful machines, amazing screens, and prices that politely tell my wallet, no thank you. So instead of buying a brand new Samsung laptop to review, we're rewinding all the way back to where it started. Meet this 11-year-old Samsung netbook powered by an Intel Atom chip so weak that in 2011, it struggled just to run its own setup screen. Fun fact, it even came with a battery mode literally called Optimized for Silence, which is basically code for please don't make me multitask. So in today's video, we're putting this tiny time capsule to the test. Can it survive modern life, or is it finally ready to join the museum of almost computers? Let's find out. When it comes to the design, the Samsung NC108 is basically the definition of a super portable netbook. It has a tiny 10.1-inch display and weighs only about 1.17 kilograms. Light enough for me to hold comfortably with one hand. The whole thing is just 25 centimeters long, which is almost the same length as my hand. Honestly, calling it a laptop feels generous. It looks more like a personal diary. The exterior was originally a clean, bright white, or at least that's what Samsung intended. But after more than a decade of use, that white has aged into whatever color this is now. Vintage? Antique? Let's just say experienced. When it comes to ports, even though this thing is basically a mini PC in laptop form, Samsung actually gave it a pretty solid setup. 3 USB ports, a VGA output, and, surprisingly, a full-sized LAN port. Something most modern thin and light laptops have completely abandoned. One thing I really like is the design language. The corners are rounded and soft, so it doesn't feel boxy or cheap. And the power button? It's tucked neatly right next to the hinge, shaped kind of like a little water droplet. It's a small detail, but it gives the whole laptop a smoother, more intentional look. And if you think things couldn't get any more vintage, oh boy, this laptop also comes with a 0.3 megapixel webcam. Yes, 0.3. By today's standards, that's basically a potato with a lens. Modern smartphones rock 12 megapixels or more. Basic security cameras start at 2 megapixels, and this little guy, well, it technically shows an image. Let's just say it's less HD clarity and more helps you confirm you still exist. Specs-wise, things don't get much brighter. Inside, we've got an Intel Atom N455, a chip launched back in 2010 and designed specifically for ultra-budget mini laptops. Its mission was simple: save power, stretch battery life, and absolutely avoid delivering anything resembling performance. With one physical core, 2 threads, and a mighty clock speed of 1.66 GHz, this CPU is basically the definition of "I'm doing my best, please be patient." Graphics? We get the legendary Intel GMA 3150, which even in its prime could barely outmuscle a modern smart fridge. RAM-wise, we've got a single 2GB DDR, 3-stick, and plot twist, only 1 slot. So yeah, I'm definitely upgrading this thing to 4GB, or maybe even 8GB if it doesn't burst into flames first. Inside CPU-Z, it's confirmed. This thing is running an Intel Atom N455, and when you look at the numbers, around 19-point single core and just 35 multi-core, yeah, it's rough. The N455 is extremely weak by today's standards. It even loses to old Celerones like the N2840 or Pentium N3510, and compared to any Core i3 or i5 from a few generations back, it's not even in the same universe. For basic tasks like browsing the web, reading articles, or typing documents, sure, it still gets the job done. But when it comes to watching YouTube videos, things fall apart quickly. Even at 240p, the playback is choppy and stutters constantly. The video just isn't smooth. I had to drop all the way down to 144p before it became watchable. And even then, the image quality is so blurry, it's basically a moving watercolor painting. Out of curiosity, I tried full HD, and the laptop said, nope, completely froze. Not even a single frame. I decided to test the speakers on this thing, and honestly, I was shocked. The sound coming out of this laptop feels like tiny needles stabbing straight into my ears. 2GB, but I couldn't even sit through an entire video. It was that bad. After more than a decade of use, the audio system has clearly fallen apart. This isn't retro charm. This is, please make it stop. At this point, it's pretty clear the hardware is way too outdated, so it's time to give this little machine a tiny upgrade, just enough to help it breathe a bit. Right now, it's running on a 320GB HDD, which is basically a spinning fossil. So I've prepared an SSD with Windows 7 64-bit already installed, along with a few games. We're going to swap out the old drive and hope things get a little smoother after that. As for the RAM, I'm upgrading it to 4GB. Not ideal, but unfortunately it's the biggest stick I have on hand. And continue bullying this poor laptop. And the moment I powered it on, the problem started again. The laptop refused to display anything. The power button lit up, fans spun, everything seemed alive except the screen. My first guess was the RAM. Maybe the 4GB stick wasn't compatible, so the system just couldn't boot. So I pulled it out and reinstalled the original 2GB stick, and thankfully it finally came back to life. I'm not gonna lie, for a second I thought I had broken something while taking it apart. But with only 2GB of RAM, this thing is extremely limited in 2024. Still, it is what it is, and we're not stopping here. Let's jump straight into the game test and see what this tiny laptop can actually do. At this point, running GTA Vice City at 640 by 480, and only getting around 16 FPS is, yeah, pretty rough. It feels like trying to drive an old, rusty sedan on a freeway full of high-performance electric cars. The gameplay is choppy, delayed, and nowhere near what we would consider playable by today's standards. But if we rewind the clock about 14 years, this little machine would have been a tiny hero. Back then, running Vice City at all was something to be proud of. And honestly, there's something charming about it. Imperfect, sluggish, but full of nostalgia that brings you right back to the early days of gaming. In the case of Counter-Strike Source, the fact that the FPS stays in the single digits and the screen is basically just black tells you everything you need to know. The system is completely overloaded before the game even starts. The CPU is pushed to nearly 90%, while the integrated GPU is barely doing anything. A clear sign that the real bottleneck is the memory. With only about 2GB of RAM, most of it is already eaten up by Windows, and the iGPU has to share that same tiny pool. That means the game has almost no memory left to load textures or render frames properly. The result? Slow rendering, black screens, and FPS dropping off a cliff. Long story short, the RAM is simply nowhere near enough to run this game smoothly. Next up, we tested F1 2002, one of EA Sports' classic racing titles from the era when 3D graphics were still pretty lightweight. And the focus was all about speed and driving feel rather than fancy visual effects. And honestly, I was surprised. Even on this tiny, low-power laptop, the game held around 40 FPS, which actually feels pretty smooth considering how old the hardware is. Moving on to Half-Life, things weren't as pretty. The laptop barely hit 20 FPS, so the movement felt choppy and the shooting didn't have that satisfying responsiveness. Unless you're a very patient person, you might want to avoid playing Half-Life on this machine. I also tested Halo: Combat Evolved, the very first game in the Halo series, a classic sci-fi shooter that pretty much defined a whole generation of FPS games. But on this little laptop, yeah, it did not go well. The FPS hovered around 3 to 4, which makes the entire game feel like it's moving through wet cement. The controls are sluggish, the camera barely responds, and anytime there's a scene with multiple enemies or effects, the system just completely gives up. In short, Halo is absolutely unplayable on this machine. I also tried launching Minecraft, but the laptop rejected it immediately. The OpenGL version supported by this CPU is simply too old, so the game can't even start. So, how bad is this 14-year-old slow laptop? Well, it struggles with even the most basic modern tasks. YouTube barely runs, and most games range from painful to absolutely unplayable. A few classics still work, but only because they're older than some viewers here. It's slow, fragile, and wildly outdated, but somehow still charming in its own broken little way. Thanks for watching, and let me know what ancient tech you want me to test next.